Now it's time for Viking Mail Call, a weekly show where you, the fans, get to ask the questions on your mind and have them answered by former Minnesota Vikings linebacker and coach, Pete Bercich. And now your host, Tom Moore.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Wild Card Playoff edition of Vikings Mail Call. I'm Tom Moore from VikeFans.com, and with the first outdoor NFL playoff game in the state of Minnesota in almost 40 years at TCF Bank Stadium on Sunday, we have the perfect lineup for our diehard Viking fans. Today, joining us, we have the game day radio voice of the Minnesota Vikings, Paul Allen, and his partner, radio color analyst, Pete Bercich. Guys, welcome to the show.
Yeah, we're happy for you, Tom. You and your 50 degrees. Stop it.
Thank you very much, Tom. 1976 outdoor playoff football in Minnesota. Norv Turner, the offensive coordinator, was in his first year as wide receivers coach at USC. Vikings head coach Mike Zimmer was he was a junior at Illinois State University, and I was age 10 discovering pubic hair.
Yeah. Well, we talk about that. You know, the age is really important here, Pete, because I don't know if you know this, but we had a birthday yesterday. And before we get started, we want to wish Paul Allen a belated happy birthday.
Whoa, I didn't know. Oh, birthday boy. Congrats.
Yeah, we didn't hear about that on Twitter or Vikings.com or anything, did we? It was pretty underplayed yesterday.
Absolutely.
It's not the birthday. What Pete and I care about is, did you get any stray gift cards or maybe a cookie platter that you're going to share with us?
Well, I got a cake delivered to me from Adrian Peterson. The video footage is at Vikings.com. And in very comfortable fashion, I kissed him on his head. I was so moved by the gesture. But see, that's nothing like, people watched it and they were like, how can you do that? You know, why do you do that? It's man to man. But Pete didn't think that because, you know, after the national anthem, before every Vikings game, we all shake each other's hands, and with the statistician and the spotter, the producer, the technical guidance and everything, we all wish everybody good luck. And frequently, I embrace Pete and kiss the side of his head. And until he tells me that that is untoward, that's just kind of how I operate.
So I got to ask this, Pete, you know, Valentine's Day coming up. You got anything planned for Paul?
Well, nothing I can disclose on air right now.
Yeah, I understand. That'll end up going on Twitter.
Let's put it this way: I got a whole pocket full of quarters for the vibrating bed.
Well,
pocket full of quarters. I'm a $20 bill in a garter kind of guy. Don't just respect me like that.
Now, understand, we have a whole fan population now. They're visualizing Paul Allen in a garter. That's not going to go well, guys.
Well, I've seen it. It's not bad.
Well, I'll tell you what, with that, guys, I'm going to turn you to football. And actually, Paul, I'm going to start with you. You know, what a huge franchise win in Green Bay on Sunday night. And the Vikings went on the road, and they literally took the NFC North Division Championship away from the Packers. Since you were there, give the fans an idea about what the emotion was of that game and the mood of the players after that big win.
Well, it was a weird week in that it was a situation where the Vikings knew if they won, they got Seattle at home in the playoffs. And, you know, the fans knew that, and Pete and I knew it. And nevertheless, knowing how good Seattle is and how much respect we have for the Seahawks, all of us wanted to see the team win the NFC North because the logical next step is to win more than you lose and win the division and start beating Green Bay. And that's what happened. And it was a momentous occasion. It came right down to the wire. It was a lot of fun. We had a really good time calling the game, and I think it's a really good achievement for Vikings football.
Is it hard for players to put that win behind them and really say, you know, that wasn't the whole goal. The goal was the playoffs. I mean, did they put it behind them pretty quick?
Yeah, they did. I mean, the celebration in the locker room was top 3 all time from what I've seen in my 14 years calling Vikings football. I mean, Pete played on that 98 Vikings team. That was super magical. Pete called games during the 2009 season. That was super magical. But for me, outside of 2009, the achievement of the second-year head coach winning the division and clearly having this team on the fast track to doing some good things, not only now, but in the immediate future, that was the prevailing opinion. But then we got back to the cities, and we had the Zimmer press conference on Monday. They watched back the film, I'm pretty sure. Then they practiced outdoors on Wednesday to get ready for Sunday, and man, it's all Seattle right now. It's all business right now.
Good. That's what fans want to hear. And, Pete, it's interesting. Paul mentions that 98 season where you played, and we move into this phase that your former head coach, Denny Green, used to call the third phase of the season, the playoffs. And as a player, you played in 10 of these playoff games when you were a linebacker with the Vikings. We always hear as fans how playoff football is significantly different than a regular season game. So can you give the fans an idea from your experience what changes in the playoffs as far as preparation, the atmosphere, and the urgency to win?
There's a number of levels here, and I think one thing that Denny Green always pointed out is you can't take the playoffs for granted. And he would have a veteran or two in the room, somebody we signed from somewhere who had been in the league for 8 or 10 years and never played in a playoff game. And if you look back, you take someone like Adrian Peterson, and then you compare him to someone like Barry Sanders, because I think he's the best running back this league has seen since Barry Sanders. So many people will say Barry Sanders is a great player and everything, but he doesn't garner the attention that, in a lot of ways, that Emmitt Smith will. And it was because Emmitt Smith won Super Bowls. And it wasn't Emmitt Smith alone winning those Super Bowls. He was part of a great team. So now you start talking about legacy. And for young guys, they're not thinking about legacy. They're thinking about getting through the season. They're thinking about keeping their job. But as you get more and more mature and further on down the road, and you know that every season is not next year is not a given, you start thinking big picture. You start thinking about what goes on, because and we tell them 20 years from now, the money might be gone. The trophies might be gone. You mean your wife might even be gone. But when you win a Super Bowl or take care of those, they can never take that away from you. That's something that brings people together years and years down the road. I mean, I've been a part of this team for 20 years. I was at Notre Dame when we were one of the best in the country. I played 3 years of varsity football. And in 27, almost 30 years of football, I was only a champion once, and that was when I was a sophomore in high school. So it's not easy to do. And you take all that, and then you look at the game plan. The game plan gets accelerated. It's more detailed. I interviewed with the Patriots the year after, a couple months after they won the Super Bowl, and their breakdown of their opponent was 10 games. Normally you go into it with 3 or 4. They had 10. So the game plan gets accelerated. What you know about the opponent gets accelerated. So the mental load increases quite a bit. And then when you get on the field, yeah, there's a higher tempo. But these guys are used to that, making that step from high school to college, from college to the NFL preseason, from NFL preseason to regular season. They respond. They're athletes. That's what they do. So I'm not as worried about them physically responding as I'm worried about mentally them responding. And then there's the big game factor. Some guys play bigger and better in big games, and we'll find out if Teddy Bridgewater is that kind of a guy.
And Tom, just to add to that, the urgency of it all and the playoff experience, intensity, and speed. I mean, as crazy as it is to think, Adrian Peterson looks like he's going to be a Hall of Famer. Best running back in the game now. Certainly a legacy kind of guy. Sunday against Seattle will be his 5th playoff game, and he came into the league in 2007. So we're looking at 9 years of a legacy, yet just 4 playoff games. And that's just to dovetail off what Pete said.
Yeah. 2 of those are one season, right?
Yeah, exactly.
After
2009 against Dallas.
Yeah.
And the New Orleans game where he had 3 touchdowns, and in 2008 against Philadelphia, he had 2 rushing touchdowns. But in 2 of those 3 games, they lost. And they've lost 3 of the 4 playoff games in which Adrian has played. So, for a guy like that, the longer the race, the bigger the spot.
Yeah, and I tell you, we talk about this. I mean, the national media, you've heard them. I mean, collectively, they're conceding this game to the Seahawks. Yet, a pretty average St. Louis Rams team took them apart in Seattle just a couple of weeks ago. And I was wondering, you've seen both teams, the Rams and the Seahawks. What did the Rams do to shut down the Seahawks? And do the Vikings have the type of personnel to replicate what St. Louis did to Seattle?
Well, Pete has watched more of the Seattle St. Louis film than have I. But Pete's heard me say this a million times, and I absolutely mean it. St. Louis does not fear Seattle. Whatever culture Jeff Fisher has established there, with Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers and Chris Long and James Laurinaitis, and even over to the offense with the way they play, as lethargic as they could be. They don't fear Seattle, and they do things that really, really throw Seattle out of whack. So quite honestly, I drew a line through that game and did not look at that Seattle game as really anything part of the past performances as to who the Seahawks truly were, and they validated it the next week by blowing out Arizona.
Pete, when you look at it, obviously, Paul talks about you looking at the film. What is it that they need to clean up in this game to make it both competitive and have a chance to win?
Well, it's points are going to be at a premium. Sometimes you play teams and you know field goals aren't going to win the game. This game, if the weather is what it's going to be or we expect it to be, then points are at a premium. Seattle, you look at Seattle and St. Louis, it's a function of a team. Just like Paul said, when you know a team and you have confidence against a team, you can play well against them. They beat them on opening day, and then they went later in the season. So they saw them in the beginning of the year when Seattle was struggling, and they saw them right in the middle of this hot streak offensively that Seattle has. And in Seattle, by the way, with the 12th man, the hardest place in the world to play, the toughest place on the road, to ever play. And they still went in there and took care of business. And what they did is just be aggressive. Attack, blitz, do those things, but do it in a smart way. Everybody knowing their role and responsibilities. And it's a balance because you don't want, if you guys can blitz, you want them to go. But at the same time, you don't want to overload them with worrying about this guy scrambling this way or getting out that way. So there's a balance there between aggression and being smart. And that's one thing that our team defensively is. It's smart. They anticipate. Hey, now, we've scored on defense a couple weeks in a row. Those things happen in bunches. We've been getting the turnovers. So if we can score on defense against Seattle, we're going to be in good shape. We just can't let them get out to a big lead and try to play catch-up because that's not how our team is built. And that goes for special teams, too. If we can get a big special team score, we're in great shape. We can't let them do the same.
Well, no doubt that's true. When you talk about championships are all about can you run the ball and can you play defense. We have those two ingredients. But, Paul, when I look at it, the one thing that still sticks out is this Viking passing game. It's still pretty up and down. And I know some of the weaknesses are a result of the offensive line's pass protection problems. But we heard Mike Zimmer this week say that he thought Teddy Bridgewater was running out of the pocket too soon and maybe not giving the routes enough time to develop. And with just 99 yards passing in Green Bay last weekend, did you see receivers open in the secondary and there were missed opportunities? And what does Bridgewater need to do this weekend to take advantage of that Seattle defense?
Well, I think Teddy got rattled in the game at Lambeau, and I can't necessarily say I saw receivers open.
Yep.
Pete watches that part of the game more than me as I follow the ball calling the game, but I definitely saw a receiver open on the third play of the game in Jarrett McKinnon against
Paul, Paul, that's what, 60 yards right there that puts him at 150 and a touchdown, right?
Yeah, but I think when he missed McKinnon, he got rattled, and I think it shook him up. And, Teddy, with the left-handed pass, that was unacceptable. The miss to McKinnon was bad. He missed Michael Pruitt because he held the ball too long. That should have been a touchdown. And Teddy had a substandard game. But, in the ultimate team game, there are others who compensate when somebody else is off. And the Vikings, fortunately, were able to do that. Now, with Teddy passing this weekend, I think a lot of it needs to be a three-step drop. I'm curious to see what they do without Red Ellison. But Bridgewater has a pedigree that should be okay for postseason football. I guess we'll figure it out this weekend.
Hey, Pete, from that standpoint, you've seen guys get nervous. You probably got nervous yourself sometimes for games. How do you take a guy who last game of the regular season in a big spot, he gets nervous, got to come back next week in a playoff game, bigger spot. How does he settle down?
You got to have a short memory. And I think to Paul's point, there's goods and bads. You got to take the good, you got to take the bad. One thing that's good that we've done up until last week was eliminate the offensive turnovers. Teddy has really cut down on those turnovers. But at the same time, I see him getting out there and getting outside the pocket, and there's a guy that might be kind of open, and he just decides to hold on to the football. So there's a balance there between taking a risk to make a play and then making a mistake. For years, we saw Brett Favre. Brett Favre, he just wanted to make plays. He didn't care if he threw 3 or 4 interceptions. He was just trying to make plays. And, Teddy, I think, especially against Green Bay, was really, really conservative And then as the game went on and he struggled, he kind of got a little desperate and tried to make something out of nothing eventually, and with the pass that was ultimately intercepted. So it's a balance. And at some point he's going to have to kind of let it loose a little bit, and you just don't want that to happen because we're down by a couple scores. So it's a happy balance, and hopefully he can swing that pendulum the other way a little bit against Seattle. Because they're good. They're a good defensive squad. There aren't going to be guys running wide open all across the field. He's going to have to make some tough throws, no question about it. This is not the week that to be that kind of conservative. You're going to have to thread the needle a few times.
Tom, earlier in the week, offensive coordinator Norv Turner told me one of the best things about Teddy Bridgewater is he generally does not make the same mistake twice. We've gone through games through 2 years where he's missed guys, and we've watched it back via the All-22, and you become frustrated. When they run that same route 3 or 4 games later, he hits them. That is a quality of Bridgewater that is proven out via film, that he's very good at not making the same mistake, torpedoing a game, and really putting you in a compromising spot because of bad interceptions or consistent misses.
Yeah, and you guys both talked about the miss to McKinnon. And, Paul, I wanted to ask you, he's obviously a big part in the passing game all of a sudden, but he's also been fairly explosive in the rushing attack, too. And I always wondered, why did the Vikings not consider maybe putting him in a split backfield with Adrian Peterson, especially on third downs? McKinnon can block, and then it provides a little bit of uncertainty for the team. Any reason why you can think why they wouldn't try that?
I think Pete would be better equipped to answer that than me. There are a lot of armchair quarterbacks who wonder a lot of things during the course of the year. A lot like questions like that. How come Cordero Patterson doesn't play more? Where's Charles Johnson? How come Kyle Rudolph has a big game, then you can't find him for 3 weeks, then he has another big game? There's so much more that goes into game planning against certain styles of defenses that guys like you and I can't touch. Mm-hmm. Pete was a coach from 02 to 05. So he worked intimately with the defensive game plan every single week. And, it's like after the Vikings played Arizona and the Bears, Teddy Bridgewater had 2 requisite games of a potential big-time quarterback. And, people would say, okay, well, where has that been? Well, if you do a deep dive on it, it turns out the style of defenses played by Arizona and Chicago are actually conducive to what Teddy does well and forces him into making quicker decisions. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody plays like that. Yeah, you understand what I'm saying, Pete?
No, absolutely. And there's always it's a good and a bad situation. I think one thing that I always want to let the fans know, because they always ask these questions: why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do this? And I remember listening to Fan Line driving home when I was coaching, and yelling at the radio on Fan Line, saying we did that during the week and it didn't work. Right. So-and-so couldn't remember the plays, and we tried that. If we could do it, we would do it. But as a coach, you can't come out and say that because you don't want to say, and I'm speaking, hypothetically here, that Adrian Peterson's not the third down back because you can't remember the third down protections, right? If that's really truly the case, then you can't come out and say that. You just got to kind of bite your lip and roll with it. You know what I mean? So, trust me, Norv Turner has been around. He's seen enough things. And for Norv, I think his biggest challenge is when you game plan against a team and you have protections that should work, and then all of a sudden, early in the game, they don't work, then you get spooked. Then you don't want to start calling things from specific parts of your game plan. And, sometimes if it's a mental error, it's very, very hard to do to call a game if you have to cross out or feel like you have to cross out a section of your play calling because the players can't execute it. Because you can't ask players to do more than they physically can do, and that's how you lose a team. And if anything, Norv is he's amazing at is being able to put guys in positions to succeed. Trust me, he would put these guys anywhere if he knew that they would be able to succeed and does that. So, look at Jerick McKinnon. Look at the role that he's expanded in the last couple of games. And let me say this about this game. Paul, our buddy, Deshaun Shedd, remember him?
Yeah.
We need to take him to the shed. He's going to be the guy that Teddy's going to need to wear out. You got to wear him out on the outside. Absolutely.
The thing about Deshaun Shedd is I think the jig is up on him. because when a cornerback they have, Jeremy Lane, was injured, he was out. He had just come back about the time they beat us 38-7. Now Lane is starting, Shedd's playing nickel. Now, if you talk to some people at Winter Park about Seattle's defense, I will have some very well-respected people tell me it's one of the better tackling defenses they've not only seen this year, but they've seen in quite some time. But that does not necessarily mean that everybody is of the sure tackling variety. What I'm getting at is if you can get people out on third corner Deshaun Shedd or second corner Jeremy Lane, then I think you have a good chance to do some damage. But as Pete will tell you, the Seahawks and teams are so squared away, they know where their flaws are. So they work things to cover up those flaws. I mean, Pete and I spent all week up to the Seahawks game and talked about a day of the game about ways in the passing attack and the running game the Vikings can pick on this corner Deshaun Shedd. The problem is they couldn't get to him because Seattle knows that was a problem spot, and they don't let you get there.
Yeah, and Paul, that dovetails perfectly with what I was just saying about Norv Turner. The genius of the whole thing is putting your players in position to succeed and knowing your weaknesses. So if Deshaun Shedd, and I saw enough film on him before our first game to know that he is a subpar cover corner, don't put him in a position where he's got to cover the number one receiver man-to-man all across the field, that kind of a thing. And you're right, they do that. I mean, Richard Sherman is not a great tackling corner either. It's just almost impossible to get the ball to the receiver who's being covered by him. And considering our receiver group, they are much, much more apt to run after the catch on a big play than they are to catch a big play. I mean, if you look at yards after catch as a percentage of your passing yards, Teddy Bridgewater is right in the top 5. A big, big chunk of his passing yards come as yards after catch. So completing short passes and doing things like that, making those guys tackle, that's something the Vikings are going to need to do.
And see, Tom, a lot of that is predicated on the fact that, Norv Turner, when he won Super Bowls with Dallas, don't for a second think Norv doesn't want to stretch the field to a Michael Irvin or Jay Novacek or run it a certain way with Emmitt Smith. But when the offensive line came up bad at certain times of the season and Teddy was getting killed, that eliminated a fair amount of the 7-step drops, certain types of 7-step drops, and deep plays. And it also made it so a play-action game with the best back in the league, that play-action game should have more impact than it does. Mm-hmm. But if they don't protect, the play-action game means nothing. So they had to go to shorter passes and become more reliant on yards after catch.
And one of the things that all the fans are noticing is, and they kept on saying, open up the offense, Norv, and they start to understand where the problems and limitations are. But we have started to see a little bit more with the Adam Thielen running. We've seen them take some chances on special teams with the fake punt. In your mind, any chance that we see a Jerick McKinnon, who was a college quarterback, throw the pass in the playoffs?
Well, I mean, in a game like this, you do need to go a little out of body to try to beat a team like this. The Vikings are underdogs at home against a team in its last 5 road games has allowed 34 total points. And that includes 0 touchdowns to the Vikings and 1 to Arizona when Carson Palmer was in the game. So you're catching the NFL's not only number 1 rushing defense, but the top scoring defense the last 4 years. So you need to do something that not only is different than the first time, but that catches Seattle off guard for at least a portion of the game. And when you catch them off guard, you have to capitalize on it. And you have to chew the clock, keep the offense off the field. And it's strange in that Seattle is identified by its defense, yet its offense has become arguably the best in the National Football League. When they were here a month ago, they ran for 173. So, I don't know if it's McKinnon throwing passes. Jarius Wright was a high school quarterback. He's capable of doing stuff like that. I have no idea what it's going to be at this stage of the equation, but you do need to do something that's not too extravagant to put yourself in position to turn over the ball, but catches Seattle off guard.
And Tom, let me piggyback on what Paul had to say. When you're talking about this team and why they're successful, you cannot not overlook guys like Adam Thielen, Marcus Sherrills. These guys do everything well. When you put these guys in the game, when you run a fake punt, you are only going to allow someone that you trust to run that play. And Adam Thielen ran it perfectly on those reverses. All these other plays that he gets involved in, he executes flawlessly. Marcus Sherrill's usually, 9 out of 10, 99.9% of the time, he's on punt return. That's a big, big position, and he usually makes perfect decisions when it comes to those situations. So those guys are as valuable to this team as a lot of the starters, in my opinion, and the success that those guys have had. I'm so happy for them. A guy like Red Ellison, too. I mean, here's a guy that does the yeoman's work, does all the blocking. A lot of these big runs on the outside are because of him. We will miss him dearly. I think we can find a way to replace him through different personnel groups and different things. But Red Ellison, Marcus Sherrills, Adam Thielen, those are the guys I think that really define this team. Those are the guys that Coach Zimmer just loves to have around and trusts them, and they answer the call whenever their number is dialed up.
You look at the other side of the ball on the defense. I mean, Paul, this has been a very aggressive ball-hawking defense all year for the Vikings. It's going to face Seattle again. But in that first game, and you look at Russell Wilson, and as a fan, a lot of times you see those quick rhythm passes he's got. You say, well, he's not that good. And then all of a sudden you look at it, he's got 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, a couple of rushing scores. What do they need to do to keep him from breaking that pocket and making plays either with his feet or kind of on the run, kind of in an ad hoc, playground style like he does?
I think Wilson's one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. If you laid them all out, I would take him in the top 5 because of his mental acumen, the way he diagnoses the game. He's a scholar of the game. His running ability is elite, and his escape ability is as good as anybody's in the NFL. Now, a problem Seattle legitimately is going to have is when they came here the first time, Anthony Barr and Harrison Smith played 11 plays, and they both came into the game with nagging injuries, and they left after 11 plays. Safety Andrew Sendejo was inactive, and defensive tackle Linval Joseph was inactive. So that's 4 of the 11 on whom you have counted to basically win 11 games. And in Joseph, Barr, and Harrison Smith, you have high-enders who would start for pretty much every team in the National Football League. The biggest problem the Vikings had in that game is with Barr and Smith out, Barr's replacement, Jason Trusnick, had been with the team a week and a half. Now he has to play the entire game. Mm-hmm. Our safeties ended up being Antone Exum and Robert Blanton, and Exum played basically the entire game with an injury that cost him his season. So, to a man, Seattle may not be loud about it, but not knowing what Joseph, Barr, Sendejo, and Smith are going to bring against that Seattle offense is a little problematic for Seattle. And when it comes to keeping Wilson in the pocket, Pete and I watched some Rams and Seahawks film yesterday at Winter Park. And, Pete unveiled some things to me with the defensive line that was very good with the Rams at flustering Russell and keeping him in the pocket. But I'm very curious to see what the most overall athletic defensive player the Vikings have, Anthony Barr, what he can do in this game in tracking and or shadowing or bugging Russell Wilson.
No, you're right, Paul. You have somebody that's athletic enough to chase him down. You mentioned, and I'm glad you brought this up, when you have Trusnick in there and you have Exum in there, and you look back at the tackling problems that we had early in that game, Sendejo and some of these other guys, if they make the tackle when the ball is caught, it's a completely different football game. No question about it. And you're right, Paul. There's the ability to have a guy like Anthony Barr be the late rusher and chase down, Russell Wilson. That's a completely different game than having Trusnick out there trying to turn back a sweep or a quick screen on the outside. There's no question about it. I think those 3 guys are going to, speaking of Harrison Smith and Anthony Barr and Linval Joseph, make an unbelievable difference.
And you based on what you guys are hearing, I know you've been out at Winter Park this week. I know Linval Joseph is trying to practice at this point in time, and he tried to come back against the Giants. He didn't look like he had a lot of push off that foot. Is he going to be ready for Sunday?
I'd be shocked if he didn't play, given the implications of the game. And, another thing to not shortchange here is Mike Zimmer's second time around against a team. Granted, it's legitimately a team that can win the Super Bowl and has been to the last 2, obviously, and won Super Bowl 48. So it's a high-end challenge. Don't shortchange this defensive mind with his full complement and all of his cliched bullets in his gun. Don't shortchange him in a second-time-around scenario. Mike is elite at what he does. He's like, when the Packers have all of their complementary players, Mike McCarthy's considered to be one of the great offensive coaches in the game. Likewise for the Saints with Sean Payton. Zimmer is every bit what they are to offense, to defense, when he has his full complement. And that is the number one thing that excites me in this game, is to watch the Vikings defense at full strength, assuming Linval plays, against the hottest offense in the NFL.
And Paul, let me piggyback on that one as well. You get Linval at nose guard. I think just as important as that is that you are now getting Sharif Floyd on J.R. Sweezy. And if that's not a matchup that favors the Minnesota Vikings up front, I don't know if there is one. And the second thing is we need to have 8 or 9 bodies on the defensive line because they are going to do a lot of running around and chasing a Russell Wilson. So we got to keep those guys up fresh. But I really think Sharif Floyd is a different player at 3 technique. I don't know why. I don't know if it's technique. I'm not sure. But his ability to get off the snap with the home field crowd, I would expect that he could wear out Sweezy whenever they get the chance to go against each other one-on-one. And that could be a big part of what makes this Viking defense good.
Tom, Kendricks is better now than he was a month ago, and it's not even close. Danielle Hunter is a lot better now than he was a month ago, and it's not even close. Captain Munnerlyn, I think, is more up to the challenge against Doug Baldwin from the slot now. Baldwin comes out of the slot 83% of the time. So that's going to be Munnerlyn/Harrison Smith's responsibility. I think that they are better equipped to handle this now. You know, I think you can read between the lines here, and a lot of it comes down to the Vikings offense complementing the defense well enough to keep it a close game late and then throw caution to the wind and see what happens.
We talk about what we got to do offensively, what we got to do defensively. There's a couple of intangibles about this game I just want to get your opinion on. And one of those was, Viking fans have always said, oh, here comes a Sunday night game or a Monday night game, big audience, and we tended to have trouble there. And we obviously beat the Giants and Packers back-to-back on Sunday Night Football. How important is that to build confidence that they can win on a big stage?
We'll take it a step farther. I mean, the team won 11 games, beat Green Bay for the first time since 2012, won at Lambeau for the first time since 2009, also won the division for the first time since 2009, had a winning record on the road for the first time since 98. The team is starting to accomplish things it hadn't done for years. So that means the next step is to win a playoff game because it hasn't won a playoff game since 2009. And you talked about the night game bit. I mean, they went back-to-back with that. So this team is jumping off the page right now with a lot of positivity. The thing is, in my opinion, it hooks the worst draw it possibly could get in the first round. I don't care where the game is. I seriously would prefer to go to Charlotte and play Carolina, Glendale and play Arizona, or Lambeau and play Green Bay before meeting Seattle. But this is the team in front of you. The Vikings defensively should be completely healthy. And as Pete Bercich likes to say, let's play.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to – I look at it this way. If you really want to make a run and do something, you're going to have to probably play Seattle at some point anyway. So why not play them at home? And, oh, by the way, if we take care of business and beat Seattle and then this squad rolls into Arizona for Saturday night next week, what do you think Arizona's going to think? They're going to be thinking, my goodness, we beat this team by a last-second field goal or by 3 points, and they just beat the team that demolished us a week ago. They're not going to feel. No one's going to feel good about playing us. The only other team that would probably be Carolina. I really honestly believe that. So you're going to have to play them sooner or later. Then why not just play them at home? All the chips are on the table, and it's going to set the table for the rest of this playoff season. And you want to talk about the ability to change people's minds and thoughts and get yourself on the map. If Teddy comes out and plays well and we beat Seattle, I mean, Teddy's not just a local name anymore now. Now he's going to be talked about. The opportunity here is amazing. The other side, you're talking about a home playoff game. It's going to be at noon. It's going to be at home. Very familiar territory. Will the atmosphere be different? I certainly hope so, and I certainly think so. But it's home. It's at noon, so it's not going to be too alien for these guys. They're going to, I think, they won't be running out of the same tunnel, dressing in the same locker. all those things are going to help, I think, ease this team into this playoff run.
It's interesting because you talk about the great equalizers we have, and a lot of the fans are talking about the cold. It's bone-chilling on the forecast here. And I'm curious, with the way players are today, is that cold really going to affect Seattle in a negative way?
But with the minus 10 to 15 wind chill, whatever it's going to be, I think the biggest concern here for both teams is ball security. And, sadly for the Vikings, Peterson puts the ball on the ground more than Marshawn Lynch. Now, Marshawn hasn't played nearly 2 months. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic in the game, too. And, as I say on my radio show here in the cities, is, hey, if they want to run Marshawn Lynch 25 times, and that means Russell Wilson's going to pass 10 fewer times, I'm in on that, if that's what the deal's going to be. Their left tackle, Russell Okung, is coming off an injury. Their right guard, J.R. Sweezy's off an injury. So they have some guys who have not played of late, and I'm curious to see how they play. But from a cold standpoint, it will impact both teams. If it's windy, if it's really windy, that will impact Seattle more than it will Minnesota.
Yeah, and Pete, you played in these games, maybe not quite this cold. At what point do the players forego the tough guy routine and put sleeves on? Will they?
Who knows? I'll say this though too, it hasn't been that cold up here yet. So it's going to affect the Vikings as much. I mean, not as much, but it'll affect the Vikings as well. It's going to affect everybody, the cold. No question about it. But just like what Paul said, you look at the strengths of these teams, the weaknesses of these teams, the more foul weather a game could possibly be, the more I think it's going to help the Vikings out. There's just no doubt in my mind that if these guys get too cold, and I mean, think about it, if we could get a nice 5, 6, 7, 8 minute drive,
yep,
and then get their offense back on the field. I mean, come on now. I mean, it'll all help. It's all gonna help.
And I don't think Seattle's ever played in a game this cold in the history of Seattle Seahawks football. And even in from a slight advantage standpoint, that Lambeau Field game that we just had, the temperature was like 13. I think the wind chill was around 10. So the Vikings come out of a game like that. Seattle comes out of a game in Glendale, Arizona, where we were there a few weeks ago, and it's the most perfect atmosphere in which you could play. So that is a sneaky little underlying factor in this game.
Yeah, no doubt. I'll tell you, before I get your final thoughts on the game this weekend, guys, Paul, I want to ask you a question. A lot of fans ask this question about what's it like getting ready for a game, and I've seen you prepare for NFL broadcasts, and fans don't realize you don't just show up and start talking, that you got a real game face on when I've seen the pregame, and I know you want to paint a vivid, kind of in-depth picture for the fans listening, so tell them what type of preparation you do before you do a broadcast.
It's a week-long affair, as Pete will tell you. I mean, I'm in Winter Park Monday through Friday. I'm permitted to watch practice, so I see a lot of things that I know are coming. For instance, in that Lambeau game, I was extremely disgusted when Bridgewater missed Jerick McKinnon on Jake Ryan because I had seen it in practice all week, and I had known how confident Norv Turner and the offensive coaches were. They were going to get that early in the game, and they were going to make it work. And then they got it, and it didn't work. So I can kind of feel their frustration. So there are a lot of private conversations behind the scenes on how the game's going to go or should go. A lot of watching practice. I watch the opponents usually either via the condensed game at NFL.com or via the All-22 at Winter Park or NFL.com. I'll definitely watch a majority of the adversary's previous game to try to memorize numbers and see who their nickel corner is and stuff like that. And then there's depth chart preparation that usually takes anywhere between 2.5 and 4 hours, depending on the situation. But you know what? This is not a real depth chart kind of game. This is not a big, intricate game to talk about Doug Baldwin when he played at Stanford and why he was a college free agent. This is a game that is predicated on reaction of everything that is happening during the course of the game and putting Pete in a spot to really capture the emotional moment of what's happening with a playoff game.
I've had the experience, something that fans don't know, and I want to mention it here. It's really seeing Paul before the game. He interacts with the kids in the stands. I've actually seen it both at home games and away, and the kids kind of just light up when they see him. So don't be surprised if you see him. He says hello to you, and you should say hello back. Paul, it makes a big difference to the fans.
Right on, man. Thank you very much.
No problem. Well, as we close our Vikings Mail Call show this week, it's time to get your take on the outcome of this game, and I'm really curious about what you expect to see on Sunday and who wins and why. Paul, I'm going to start with you.
I think the Vikings defense can roll with Seattle's offense for a majority of the game. I'm concerned about the Vikings offense rolling with Seattle's defense. Now, without Red Ellison, there are going to be some things this week that nobody has seen, and certainly Seattle has not seen. I can't guarantee they're going to work, but it is different. I'm excited to see that. So if the Vikings can win the time of possession battle and at least push in the turnover and or third down battle, I think they have a great chance to win the game.
And Pete, how do you see it?
Well, minus any black swan event, and by that I mean turnovers and special teams and anything like that, this game will either be tied or down by 1 or 2 in the last drive. And I think I can just see it in my mind, it's going to be the Vikings football. It's going to be us driving. It's going to be us having to end the game on the leg of Blair Walsh.
Oh, my God.
I think about 2009 when we didn't get it done. I think about Arizona when we didn't get it done. I think we get that done, and that this game, if it's played out the way it should be, and again, minus any black swans, meaning fumbles and crazy things that can happen throughout the game, but if both teams play the way that they have in the last couple of weeks and play a solid football game, I think it's going to come down to a Blair Walsh field goal right at the end of the game, and then PA is going to go absolutely bananas.
Yeah, off that, a couple of things. One, for Pete's scenario to work out, I would pay $1,000. I mean, if God somehow came out of the sky and said, "Here's the deal, but you got to rip up 10 $100 bills for that," I would rip them up, give them to a charity. Whoever wants it, Tom, you can have it. Secondly, if that were to happen, don't for a second think that we have had a little bit of a theme this year when playing high-end teams in tightly contested games. At the ends of games, we have lost on strip sacks at Denver and at Arizona. So you have to be very, very wary of that. This 72 for Seattle, Michael Bennett, he's unbelievable. And he single-handedly can wreck the game if you don't put a lot of attention and four hands on him pretty much every time you want to throw the ball. So don't let Michael Bennett wreck the game. And like Pete said, don't have any black swan moments. And who knows, man, maybe you can win.
Well, I love it. If the script is exactly as it plays out, as Pete says, you're going to have a lot of happy Viking fans. And with that, we come to a close of another Vikings Mail Call.
Hold on, Tom. One more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing. If this comes down to a physical game, and by physical I mean us running, them running, that is a battle that we will win. I know this defensive front seven. I think their linebackers and safety tackle as well as anybody in the league. I do not think their defensive linemen can hold up to the push. They don't have the depth that they had years past. And if it comes down to that, if it comes down to us squaring off and just defeating and beating the guy in front of them and Adrian Peterson can go about his work, we will win this game and we will wear them out.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's exactly what we're looking for. You're back to that cold weather scenario. There's the reason to get them on the ground. So, and guys, I really want to thank you both for joining us today, talking to the fans, give them an idea of what they should look for, what they might see on Sunday.
Tom, you're fantastic. Thanks a lot for the time.
No problem.
Tom, I hate your guts. Tom, I hate your guts. You're terrible, and it's been a total waste of my time.
Pete, I'm still waiting for the Christmas gift. But before we go, I want to encourage the Viking fans to tune into PA's show from 9 to noon on KFAN every day for all your Viking news, but not only for the playoffs, it's going to be all off-season as well. And remember to join Paul and Pete this Sunday for the Game Day radio broadcast of the playoff game between the Seattle Seahawks and your Minnesota Vikings beginning at 10 a.m. on the flagship radio station for Viking football, KFAN at 100.3 FM and in the Twin Cities, on iHeartRadio and on Sirius XM Radio. And so until next week, for Paul Allen and Pete Bercich, I'm Tom Moore. So long, everyone.